Hi there, Michael here. Today I have a very special treat for you. The following is a conversation with Ben Weatherill, owner and developer of Southloop Studios, the development company behind Orbit Pro. Southloop Studios came pretty much out of nowhere late last year and have since made a name for themselves as one of the most innovative software development companies in the immersive audio space. If you have any interest in Dolby Atmos, Eclipsa audio, or audio software development in general, you definitely do not want to miss this. Now, a little word of warning, while we were discussing 3D audio, I had a massive thunderstorm coming through my area, so you might hear some rumbling in the background here and there, and at some point I even had an emergency notification going off, but that could not distract us. That's how fascinating our conversation was. But enough said, let's turn it over to Ben from Southloop Studios. Okay, so I'm here with Ben Weatherill from Southloop Studios. Welcome, Ben, and thank you for coming on. And Ben has been somebody who is really keeping me busy with his updates of Orbit Spatial. I think I already made 3 videos at that point, and I have a feeling that there are a couple of more videos I need to make. And we want to talk a little bit about what Orbit Pro is and what Southloop Studios does. Now, my understanding is at the moment Southloop Studios is Ben, so this is a one-person thing, which is honestly astonishing, given how many things that you kind of turn out to produce. Now, let's start off a little bit by kind of figuring out where Southloop Studios comes from. So you are coming into this space as an independent developer, and you're trying to essentially compete with quite substantial companies like Dolby and Fraunhofer and Apple. Now, why do you think you can succeed? What was the gap that you saw in this space that made you think, well, I need to do something here?
So it's a bit of a weird one because it as with any sort of good business, this was never really planned. And it sort of happened a little bit by accident. So back to the sort of early days of when Orbit started, it started as a little bit of a project, mainly to try and help me actually mark and view student work at Coventry University. So I deliver a spatial audio module at Coventry University. And it got to the point where I was getting a lot of questions off students going, I'd love to just be able to, how do I view this ADM file? I can't, when I'm pressing play, I'm only hearing left and right, and, I don't really know what to do with this. And I was like, well, you could use the Dolby Atmos renderer, or you could use Logic. Well, I don't have Logic, and I don't have $300 for the Dolby Atmos renderer. And I was like, you know what, that's a very good point. So it started as a little bit of okay, can I create something that initially the idea was to be able to utilize Apple Spatial Audio. So to be able to get 12 channels out of this and to queue up Apple Spatial Audio on your Mac or your phone or whatever you want to do, and to be able to play this back. And then after a few days and after a few coding sessions, things escalated a little bit. And then by the time it got to December and Christmas, and I was programming on Christmas Day, I didn't really have a Christmas, if I'm completely honest. But, that's what you do for the love of spatial audio, is that it escalated into a full-blown macOS app. And it really started as not really to directly compete with kind of what Dolby is doing or anybody else in the space. It was designed to show as much detail as it could that other apps don't necessarily show you. So, what's going on with your objects? Let's have a look at, immediately a 7.1.4 waveform. Can it utilize Apple Spatial Audio, which was a bit of a difficult thing in the early days of Orbit, but then obviously I managed to get it to work. But it really was designed to be quite simple, drag in an ADM and get it playing, straight away. And then obviously, as I'm sure you found out, things have escalated. And, it's gone from, regular Orbit to Orbit Lite, which I suppose really in a way Orbit Lite was originally what I kind of set out to do, was to create a simple drag in a file, it plays back. And, that app came... Technically, that app came third. There's actually an app in between this that no one knows about. And it's sat there doing absolutely nothing at the moment, and it's not even related to spatial audio, but we won't even we'll talk about that just yet. Yeah. And then obviously kind of later down the line, I'm like, okay, this is quite cool. And, I've had interesting conversations with people from all the way from Dolby to, loads of different places. And I was like, do you know what? I think this could actually be quite cool, because essentially what I've done is I've created an independent ADM renderer. And actually in the original days, it did use a little bit of Libya. So it used the ear renderer from, the BBC and the EBU. But that ended up not really working the way that I wanted it to. So I just went back to the drawing board and was like, do you know what? We're just going to essentially parse and play these ADMs back exactly as it states in the spec. And, we'll go from there. And obviously, again, things escalated. Then we've got Orbit Pro and things like this. And a kind of the way that I'm now seeing Orbit and the Orbit sort of, the lineup of tools is that it's flexible and it's independent and it can play back ideally anything, which is obviously where Google Eclipsa comes into it and IAMF. So, like I say, it was never really designed to compete with them to a degree. But obviously, as it started to progress, I suppose it has started to, in a way, eat into their space, which is, in a way, I suppose, a happy accident. But, it was never really the intention. But now, obviously, it has turned into the attention. And I think, obviously, as you look at Orbit Pro, for example, you can probably actually gauge, without me saying anything, where it's probably going. Since we've now got individual channels, we've got tracks, we've got, there's a mute button, for example, on the objects that doesn't do anything at the moment. We've got editing tools within the tracks area that currently doesn't do anything at the moment, but does in the video area, for example. So it's progressing into something much, much bigger from not just, QC, but to, potentially editing later down the line, recording, whatever it may end up being. But its pure focus is obviously dedicated spatial audio.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. In my days, we called this a weekend project gone bad, right? It's you start something because you think you need it, and then it balloons into. Just to reiterate how quickly everything developed. So you're talking about Christmas Eve. Which year was that?
So work started in approximately late November. And it started for various different reasons, because late November 2025.
2025. So we are talking about a little over 6 months, well, 7-8 months at that point.
Yes, I mean, the sort of fundamental of Orbit was completed sort of early January, which is when I originally put out the first screenshots. And at that point, it was working, but I wouldn't say it was in necessarily the best state. Waveform calculations took far too long and things like that. So 2 months is probably from ideation to release. 6th of February is when it first came out.
Well, you do realize that is insane.
Yeah, I know that's slightly insane, and people who know me on other projects that I've ever done know. Unfortunately, I have a habit of doing this.
And now, you already kind of alluded a little bit that Orbit Pro actually became much bigger. And kind of, I'm kind of curious how you think that's, and we're going to talk about a little bit that later as well. But since we're already at it, I was wondering how you actually think that you can do that as a single developer, right? I mean, we are kind of getting into serious digital audio workstation, or maybe even video editing territory.
Yeah.
And that seems like almost unachievable for a single person.
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly the way that it's heading, and whether I'd be able to achieve all its sort of, goals that I've got a big long list of is, that's to be seen at the moment. I'd like to be able to believe that I could probably do it, but, whether I'd be alive at the end of it, I'm not sure. But it's one of those things of, I think the app certainly now has a certain ambition, and it's clear kind of what that ambition is. Obviously it's sort of got, it's got basic non-linear video editor in there. There's only basic tools, but yes, you can cut, edit. It's, at the moment it's quite snappy at rendering video, which is great because it uses Video Toolbox. So, that's kind of really nice. And then in terms of the audio side of it, yes, the goal is really that it is going to pretty much turn into a DAW within its own right, but it's going to do things a little bit differently. It's not going to be a usual sort of flavor.
Now, a lot of mixers deliver ADMs by just kind of checking everything only on their own kind of development workstation, right? So within the digital audio workstation. I'm kind of curious, what are the most common problems that you see with real-world ADM files? And kind of why should engineers check them before they go into delivery? Why should they use like something like Orbit Pro?
I mean, obviously, kind of one of the biggest issues I think that we see a lot of people doing is not checking it on something like Apple Spatial Audio. That's probably the biggest common thing. And you've got to kind of look at Apple's dominant share in the world of playing back Dolby Atmos files. I mean, it's not even a fair competition. It's the majority of people are listening to stuff, on there. Yet, if you're producing on Pro Tools or you're in Studio One or you're in any other sort of software, nobody's sort of really checking on there. So I'd say, in terms of people checking files, they're not really checking it on Apple Spatial Audio, which is, I suppose, which is where Orbit Monitor comes in, being able to do that. And obviously there are other tools out there that can utilize the Apple Spatial Audio. So that's kind of one of the biggest things. And, when I'm listening to mixes, and I'm sure you get this as well, you can certainly tell the mixes that are being checked on Apple Spatial Audio because it's just coming across a little bit, more designed, obviously, for that program. But obviously, what's quite interesting about the Apple Spatial Audio side is that it's not really using Dolby's renderer at all. It's just using Apple's own tools. And I think people either just forget that or don't necessarily know because it's not the clearest thing in the world. But it's sort of hidden on Apple's documentation somewhere on their website. So that's one of the first things. Another thing is and the nice thing I quite like about Orbit is that it'll show you things like, blank objects really clearly, and, that'll get better as well in the future of, highlighting things. So, objects that aren't necessarily doing anything or objects that are panning erratically or listening to things back on different renderers as well is a good thing to do, and even different binaural renderers. I mean, all right, yes, if you're doing an Atmos master, it's going to be going out to, using the Dolby Atmos renderer or our Apple, but it is good to kind of hear things on as many different renderers as you can see fit, because obviously, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, but, different HRTFs are going to have different effects on different people. For me, Apple Spatial Audio is quite forward-facing, and I personally actually don't get on with my personalized Apple Spatial Audio profile. It doesn't work for me at all. Whereas, the normal one that's not personalized, I actually quite like.
Same thing here, same thing.
Yeah. So I think, the common thing is actually more down to that sort of end delivery thing. But also, I think the other thing, and the thing that I'm starting to see, is the fact that I think a lot of people aren't even aware that there are multiple flavors of ADM. I think most people are aware that there's an Atmos master, but they're not aware, that, you've got EBU ADMs flying around the broadcast world, which are, to this day, I mean, the Dolby Atmos is spec 0 just when it came out, and then spec 1 came out roughly around about, so it's 2015, 2016 sort of period. And then we're on spec 3 now. And, Dolby Atmos is actually, in terms of ADM, is really quite far behind. It doesn't do higher order ambisonics, it doesn't do matrix, it doesn't do binaural, so dedicated binaural. It doesn't do certain things that, ADM can already do. And I think, a lot of people just really aren't aware that that's even a thing, or even how to produce those files, which is being the difficult thing on my end is the wild card of, I ended up having these EBU ADMs and I was like, oh, Orbit doesn't render these properly at all. It's not working. It's not doing program correctly. It's not doing content groups. It's not doing anything that it should do properly. So I think that's quite a common, misconception about ADM in a way.
Yeah. Now you are leaning heavily into IAMF and Eclipsa. At this time where Atmos is still kind of the de facto standard. So I'm kind of curious why you decided to go with this open codec, where we actually at the moment don't really yet know how this is going to develop or how important that's going to be, because it seems to me that this is something that probably kind of requires a lot of development effort. And actually, kind of in the video that is going to go live about a week before this, our conversation here goes live, where I talk about the latest version of Orbit Spatial, I actually say that Google should just hire you kind of to take over the Eclipsa development because you are actually kind of doing things much faster and much more efficient than both Google and Samsung combined. So I'm kind of curious why Eclipsa?
I think it's quite interesting, and it was never a thought in the early days. I didn't, I will be completely honest, I didn't even know it existed up until approximately February. And then the word Eclipsa started, floating around. I was very much in, Dolby Atmos world. I was very much in, trying to get EBU ADMs to work. I hadn't really considered, there's this file, out here called IAMF, which is obviously the hardest thing to say in the world, which is thus the Google Eclipsa branding, I think, is it makes it a little bit easier than trying to say IAMF, but
I constantly kind of trip over that. I kind of it's almost impossible to say. I think
it comes out as IMF, as when I try and say that. So, it was never really a thought, and then it was actually mentioned to me by somebody else, and I apologies to the person who mentioned it to me. I do not remember who it was. And the more I looked into it, the more I kind of realized that, hang on a second, this actually could end up being the next good way forward for spatial audio, because for me at the moment, the biggest issue that we've got is everything is proprietary in some way, shape or form. Pretty much all of most spatial audio, other than things like ambisonics and stuff like that, is quite heavily proprietary. So we've got this open standard coming that could shake things up a little bit. And the more you look into this, and you look into the Alliance of Open Media and kind of to what they do, and then you look into things like AV1, their video codec.
Yeah.
AV1, if you were to draw a comparison in between AV1 and Google Eclipsa, you would actually say, hang on a second, if you were to put money down, realistically, they could pull this off. They could actually make this work and actually take a significant chunk of the market, because AV1 realistically won at the end of the day, Netflix adopting it, and loads of different people, and built into M3 MacBooks onwards. So realistically, this could actually be a really cool way forward, that obviously nobody else is doing at the moment. It's sort of an open standard. But as you highlighted, the speed of it is obviously certainly going to be the issue of adoption, and the noise around it has gone in waves. I think we could certainly agree that it's, and at the moment, and I'm certainly feeling this, is that the noise around it has died down a little bit. Possibly down to AV2, because obviously AV2 is just out, but I'm not 100% sure. So obviously with Google Eclipsa, the big advantage is that its main target is going to be the biggest streaming platform in the world. It's going to be YouTube. And if you actually look at the specs, it's really quite interesting, because obviously the early days of it, V1 and V1.1, there's no objects at all. It's basically just channel elements and some ambisonics, or scene-based elements, which thankfully they kept the terminology roughly similar to Dolby to try and help people and whatnot. But obviously with V2, which has been in draft since early 2025, so there hasn't been any changes since, and I don't think it's going to change. And this is kind of where my gamble's a bit interesting, because obviously I've built a platform that exports V2. I've got Esfera, which is obviously my streaming platform, which is the V2 spec of IAMF Google Eclipsa, but it's still in draft format. But realistically, I just can't see it changing at the moment, because it's been in draft for so long. Is there anything going to change? And the news on the grapevine is that I don't think it will. I could be proven wrong, but I don't think it will. So realistically, as soon as Eclipsa comes to YouTube and proves itself, other people may potentially adopt that, given, potentially licensing fees or whatever it may be, if they pull it off correctly. But obviously, like I say, the speed and the noise is obviously certainly the issue. So in a way, Orbit's trying to sort of pick up that noise a little bit and to sort of, as any good business person tries to do, is obviously I wanted to be there first and to try and do something that nobody else is doing. Clearly, obviously, FFmpeg, couldn't say that properly. Obviously, does some Google Eclipsa, transcoding and things, which is great, but that's still only v1.1 spec.
Yeah.
VLC can sort of play it, but the nightly builds that I've been trying, it doesn't work at all. It just crashes.
Yeah,
so it is a little bit, it's a little bit hit and miss. And actually, as of today, I've just released an Orbit Lite update, so you can play back Google Eclipsa with video all the way up to the V2 spec, which is great. So that's kind of been a nice little build coming out. But it is in sense a gamble, and I'd like to see them pull this off. Like I say, if you go off what they did with AV1, there is a high chance that this will work and it is going in the right direction. But I do think the future of Spatial has to be open. It can't just be, closed renderers forever. Credit where credit's due to Dolby. They've done amazing work for pushing spatial audio forward. As I'm sure, all of us who have been in the spatial world will remember 5.1 failed sort of miserably for music, and we've tried this several times, but credit to Dolby, they've pushed it to the consumer aspect, which has really worked. But obviously at the moment it's held by, in a way, one person. You've got MPEG-H and a few other brands, but it is held by this one company. And it's only a matter of time before an open codec was going to come around.
Yeah, I was kind of curious. You mentioned MPEG-H, right? Mm-hmm. So that would have been the other alternative in terms of an open standard, right? Mm-hmm. But you decided to go with Eclipsa.
Yeah, I can see, obviously Eclipsa's got the biggest advantage, which is Google and Samsung, and they are significant heavyweights, and they have access to, obviously, YouTube. And obviously, if YouTube gets that, then, Google Music and things like that get it. And then you've still got the unknown factor, which is Spotify. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know what's happening in the back of Spotify. I don't know if anybody really truly does know what's going on there, but they still do not have spatial audio. And are they waiting for this? Is always going to be something that is in the back of my head.
It's kind of interesting, I had multiple conversations essentially with Fraunhofer in terms of MPEG-H and everything. The problem that I have with MPEG-H is that it became so fragmented because it's sort of an open standard, and then you can simply take it and implement it. Because Sony 360RA is technically MPEG-H, right? And the Chinese format Vivid Audio is also just a ripoff of MPEG-H, so it's technically all the same. So in that sense, I do get that the Eclipsa has this kind of appeal of being sort of supported by Google, and your comment about the video codec is actually interesting, because I never thought about that. So sort of kind of using that as an example where they were actually successful in doing that. Now, I have to be perfectly honest that actually in the video that's coming out a week before this one, I was not able to kind of get it to work with YouTube. So it's technically supporting it, but it's a bit of a challenge. In my case, the video uploads kind of did not go anywhere. Yeah. And yes, VLC technically is supposed to be able to play it, but I had the same problems. Yeah. I'm not able to get the nightly bits to actually
the best way that I've found so far is the IAMF web demo, which is like this binaural web demo it's actually a GitHub Pages project that's run by the Google team. And that you can drag in an IAMF file with video or without, so you can have an MP4 or the .iamf file up to v1.1. And you can drag that in, and that's kind of what I'm using at the moment to sort of verify files work. Obviously, you can use various command line tools to check if Google Eclipsa is there on your YouTube video, but obviously, unless you've got a supported device, it's sort of next to impossible. But I have had success of checking my own videos via various command line tools just to check the codec is actually there. It is a bit of a minefield.
It's a bit of a minefield right now, but it sort of is nice. I think kind of the fact that you actually are decided to take that gamble is kind of you're going to be a first mover. So if that's actually going to become something, then your company is going to be quite successful with that, because essentially there's really nothing else out there, right?
No.
Now, you build your own head-related transfer functions, and head-related transfer functions are kind of everywhere on these days, right? So even the audiophile community is starting to talk about HRTFs and how important HRTFs are. Now, I'm kind of curious, because I ever wondered that how complicated is it actually to develop your own HRTF, one that actually sounds good. And you already mentioned that, and I have the same problem with Apple Spatial, that the personalized one does not work for me. It sounds off. So how do you actually go about creating one that sounds good?
So I mean, in the initial days of Orbit, the goal was actually to always have its own HRTF, and I cannot tell you how many research papers I've read to try and figure out the best way of getting this to kind of work in a way that works for everybody. I mean, I've played with ear scanning, I've played with some machine learning tools, I've played with everything to try and gauge, what is the best way forward, for Orbit's binaural. And interestingly, in the end, for an Orbit's binaural, and we do say this on our website, is that it is a fully synthesized HRTF. It's not based on anything, and it's basically manually me essentially going through and testing multiple iterations of randomly generated HRTFs, and essentially me coming to a conclusion of which particular zone sounds the most natural, the most good, what gives me the best height backs. Now, the heights are still certainly an issue, but I kind of feel like, back surrounds and things like that on Orbit's HRTF is quite good. I quite enjoy it, but I think, like I say, the heights do need a little bit of work, but they're obviously the most difficult. But to say that it's been easy is it's not true at all. It's by far the hardest thing that I've tried to do within Orbit. And in terms of personalization, there's two steps that I sort of tried to take with this. The first was actually a user request. Could we have sofa files? And I was like, yeah, I mean, I don't see why not. It should just plumb straight into Orbit. Well, we'll give that a try. And then the second thing was obviously auto EQ and headphone EQ. And obviously both of those things are in Orbit at the moment. I'd love to be able to have fully personalized HRTFs. That would be, fantastic. But I think if you kind of, do a lot of listening to obviously like Apples and Dolbys and all the other HRTFs out there, they mostly do an okay job is probably the best way to say about all of them, including mine. It mostly does an okay job. It's nice. And I'm quite glad that I think more people are taking more of an interest into it and kind of, the tools that are out there. And, there's obviously some fantastic work by Sound ID team and Dolby as well, which they've got a kind of really cool tool coming out. But yeah, I mean it's been super important for me, and the work hasn't really stopped on the HRTF side of things. But interestingly, I think the future of HRTFs and binaural is not measured off your head necessarily getting the exact sound that you need. It's actually through a bit of machine learning, a bit of AI, and to be able to measure your ear, measure your head size, and to be able to generate ideally the perfect HRTF, but as fully synthesized HRTF is the way forward that I kind of see it.
Yeah. Very, very interesting. I just need to make a comment to the viewers out there, because currently I'm essentially, there's a thunderstorm coming through where I am. So in case there are any thunders, kind of even the weather is excited that we have this conversation. Now, we already talked about that a little bit, and that is that in Orbit Pro you can kind of check different, rendering versions. And one thing that you can do is also you can compare it against Apple Spatial Audio, which is the one that most consumers probably are going to hear, because that's sort of what's coming with Apple. And how should actually mixers think about kind of this gap between the studio grade binaural renderer that kind of in the end the audio ends up in somebody's AirPods?
I mean, I think it's always quite an interesting thing, and I actually think in terms of the way that a lot of people approach immersive audio in general is that we're thinking not really enough about the consumer, about how they're going to be listening to music. I mean, the majority of people are going to be mixing in a big studio that may or may not be correct speaker positions according to whoever's spec that you're going to be working with. I actually think, one of the most important things that you can do is absolutely go and buy yourself a pair of Apple Spatial compatible headphones, so AirPods Max or the AirPods Pros, and just check every track that you do and move your head around. Have you got the space? Has it got the heights? Do you need to do anything else? Because, as we said before, it has such a large market share of this, and it's defaulted on for most people as well. So most people don't even realize that they're listening to it for a start. So obviously, if they are listening to it, that's great. But I think it's one of those things that not enough people are aware of obviously doing. And the goal, obviously, of putting it in orbit was to be able to go flick it on and move your head around and do what you need to do. And I think, for the most part, I think Apple have done a very good job of creating a really kind of nice sounding HRTF. It's super low latency, which is great, and if you've got AirPods on, you can move your head around like this and it's just immediate, it's actually fantastic. But yeah, not enough people are checking these mixes. I've listened to plenty of mixes where I'm just like, it sounds like stereo. It just still sounds like stereo. I'm not getting this here.
Yeah,
where's this?
It's true, right? I mean, it's a little bit frustrating, honestly. If you go through the Apple Spatial list and then you're kind of listening to all the tracks that they have listed on the Spatial kind of this top 10 Spatial list, and kind of it just sounds not really all that good, and that actually also is a little bit of a problem because people are just turned off by that, right? So they don't see the advantage.
I actually think interestingly, a lot of the good content for Apple Spatial is the stuff that's not on that list. Yeah. I mean, there's a fantastic band I'm sure many people are aware of it called Snarky Puppy, and their latest album with the Metropole Orchestra is all done in Atmos. And that's fantastic. You are in the room. It's mixed really well. Some fantastic classical stuff out there that's just super well recorded. But yeah, interestingly, the curated list isn't as spatial as I would like it to be.
Yeah. It's not really spatial at all. Now that already brings us to the next question that I had, and that is regarding the when we're thinking about delivering immersive audio to listeners, that actually is the bigger bottleneck, right? Because I mean, producing, we have all the tools that in order to kind of do that. Now you decided to create your own browser-based platform. I think Esfera, right? Is that the name? Now, what was the hardest way of creating that and getting studio quality binaural rendering running in a browser? I'm kind of curious because that is a little unusual that a single person company would kind of try to attempt that.
Yeah, I actually, interestingly, in the whole history of the Esfera platform got to the point where I genuinely thought this might not be possible, and very much hit a brick wall. And yeah, it's been an interesting journey. I mean, Esfera is quite an interesting platform because it's designed to be, again, agnostic in a way. So it's both Google Eclipsa and it will play back ADMs as well. And it's 50% a social media sort of sharing platform, kind of similar to things like SoundCloud and things like that. But obviously, it's spatial first, and it does similar sort of things. It gives you a nice waveform. Etc. You can upload albums, stuff like that. But it's also supposed to be a sharing tool for engineers with clients and things like that because it will play back full ADMs. And one of the biggest things that I've tried to do with Orbit in the early days of Orbit, I mean, you should have seen the code base of it. I mean, it was total chaos. It looked like staring into someone's head, which I suppose probably was that. And one of my hardest challenges was, okay, I need to strip so much out of this and put it into its own thing its own engine that can go to anywhere that it needs to go to. So that's what became of what we call Orbit Core. And Orbit Core is quite cool because it doesn't rely on anything that is platform specific whatsoever. A lot of it is custom made. So obviously the ADM renderer is fully custom. The Google Eclipsa renderer is fully custom. It doesn't rely on Google's examples or anything like that. It's built from the ground up. The HRTF is custom. It's built from the ground up. So everything is designed to work anywhere that it can go to. Linux even though I've not targeted Linux. Mm-hmm. And the goal was to try and take that and shove it on the web and get it to work. And in the early days, it basically just didn't work. I mean, it was a nightmare. It was a distorted mess is probably the best way to describe it, because the hardest thing about getting something like this to develop for the web is that there's a time limit before you can obviously receive audio and play it back and get it into your ears. And it's even stricter on mobile. And it's a lot stricter than a desktop app. So I was constantly hitting the brick wall of audio's just not received in time, and this just sounds like a bit of a mess. And through, loads of iteration, plenty of help from, good old AI trying to stop me from not going nuts. It eventually slowly got there, but it was sort of brute force in a way. And it actually got to the point where we actually had a successful playback of a fairly decent Google Eclipsa file. So it was 28 channels. And the way that Esfera works, it's not like a binaural render or anything like that. It is streaming the full 28 channels straight into Orbit Core, exactly as Orbit works. And then obviously it does all the renderer magic, plays back the objects, etc., spits that out to a virtual 7.1.4 studio, and then HRTF calculation to your ears, and then obviously you've got your output from there. And there is actually a desktop app for Esfera, so it does full multi-channel. So obviously it skips the HRTF side of things, because multi-channel on the web isn't really in the best state. It's not great. So in the early days, that kind of really worked for Opus and for Eclipsa, and I was like, okay, this is going to really work. But what I really wanted was to be able to play back ADMs as well, and that was easily the hardest thing. It worked if I was doing something like a local development. So if I had Esfera running on my desktop and I was pulling a file off my Mac, then yeah, that's going to be streaming back no problem at all. It's not going to have any issues of pulling that data off a really fast Mac SSD. But as soon as it went onto the web, it just went, no, sorry, I can't really do this. And roughly around about 2 weeks ago of tons of development, and I really remember this day because I pulled a near 24-hour day. I played back with no issues whatsoever the full Nature's Fury ADM. So 118 channels of uncompressed PCM over the web, through the browser, into my ears without an issue. But you should see the network tab on Google Chrome, because it's hilarious. It's just 5 meg, 5 meg, 5 meg, 5 meg, 5 meg like this. And it's obviously, it's pushing it really to its limit. But the idea was, if I can push this and I can push Orbit Core to its limit in such a constrained space, then it'll work on anything that I can possibly throw it at. So obviously it'll work on a phone, but it won't do the full 118 channels of ADM on a phone. It's just, it still struggles and it doesn't like it. But, Eclipsa is absolutely fine. Doesn't really care about it. It works perfectly fine. So yeah, getting that to work has been difficult. And I think that difficulty has made me appreciate, in a way, how difficult it's been probably for the Google team to get Eclipsa out for things like YouTube. Yeah. Because if I've had that much difficulty as a slightly nutty solo developer, I can imagine the difficulty that anybody else who's trying to do this, is facing. But today it works, and it's nearly out.
Well, I would argue that kind of, Google and Samsung probably have a lot of highly paid developers that they can throw at that, right? I mean, it's now as a consumer or producer, how do I interface with Esfera? So that people understand what they can do with it.
So it works basically kind of like a regular sort of social audio sharing platform. So you'll be able to go to esfera.audio, and if you've got an ADM, an Atmos ADM, for example, you will be able to upload that. It will convert it to Eclipsa for you. You don't get any choice as to how it converts. So it'll either convert it to a V.1.1 spec of your choosing. So all your objects will be merged down into a first order ambisonics channel. You'll get a 7.1.4 channel as well for your bed. And that's basically what you end up with. Or you can select the V2 spec, which will save your objects up to however many it is of them. So you've got 12, you've got 16 objects that you can save in total. And then you can quickly listen to that back, check that it sounds okay, make sure that it hasn't messed with your files and, objects aren't flying around in the wrong direction. And then you can either keep that as private, or you can publish it, or you can share it. Or alternatively, you can upload an IAMF file if you've already got one. Or if you've got just an ADM and you want to share that with somebody to play back full PCM, you can do, but that'll only work on the desktop web version of it. And you can't publish ADMs publicly. You'll only be able to publish Eclipsa files publicly. And that's really just down to the fact that if you do get somebody who uploads a massive ADM, it may or may not work, depending on internet speeds, whatever you may potentially have. So I know 100% Eclipsa will work. So that should go live in the next week or so. But it's you've got comments, you've got embedding, so you can embed on your own website, things like that. It works very much like other platforms that do a somewhat similar sort of thing, but it is spatial first. So yeah.
Cool. So we are recording this about a month before it goes online. So by the time actually this is online, people will already be able to.
Yeah, there'll be a public beta, and the public beta there's a trial. In terms of ADM conversions, you get X amount of minutes worth of conversion, because obviously the compute's not free. It costs me money every time. Obviously, someone converts an ADM, or alternatively, you can use Orbit Pro and convert it on as many times as you want. So you get X amount of minutes to try, and then there are various subscription levels which give you different tools. So there's a subscription level that just gives you a lot more minutes of conversion, unlimited uploads, etc., and then there's a higher subscription which is it's got kind of a cool sort of commenting system. So if you've uploaded an ADM, you can go backwards and forwards on changes, markers, comments, that sort of thing. If you're working on a current project, but again, those are private; they can't be publicly shared. They're all secure, encrypted, etc. So you don't have to worry about people accidentally hearing your ADMs.
If people upload an ADM, and kind of one of the things that a lot of people are usually surprised about is the size of those ADMs, right? So if you are having a lot of kind of objects and everything is really uncompressed, then kind of these are usually gigabytes of. So when do you have any concern with the bandwidth and kind of the storage requirement? So the ADMs, are they stored on your systems, or kind of how does this work?
They're stored on Cloudflare's systems. So we've got a Cloudflare backend. And it's stored on there. It's all encrypted. I've no idea what's what, because obviously everything's, it doesn't store the names or anything. It's just linked directly to your account. But I'm not particularly too worried about, massive ADMs going up. It's primarily a very music first platform, with the secondary goal of podcasts and spatial podcasts, which is quite an interesting sort of. So there's a company called Nomono, which you may be aware of, and they make a really cool tool called the Spatial Capsule, and it's got like a little first order ambisonics recorder in it, and it's got little clip-on mics that track your location, which is quite cool. And obviously they're banking on spatial audio podcasts, and obviously the one thing that we don't have at the moment really is a platform to have spatial audio podcasts, 360 podcasts.
That is actually true. I kind of you might not know that, but I actually had a demo unit of the Nomono device here, and I did a video, and I also did. If I'm not completely mistaken, I'm starting to forget what videos that I did, but I think I had a conversation with the people from Nomono, at least kind of personally. And yes, this is an interesting space. I also had a conversation with Ryan Schwabe, who was a former colleague of mine, and he had 2 Grammy nominations and then started to spin off his own company. So he's now doing plugins and everything. And in this conversation, we talked just briefly about spatial audio, and he said that from his perspective, and that once again is a Grammy-nominated engineer. Podcasts are the most likely kind of way things, or kind of the most likely application that really makes the most sense. And I'm in the middle of a thunderstorm, and kind of the light goes on and off. So in case in case things are flickering here, I'm sorry. I'm sorry with it. But coming back to the podcast, and I think that's completely underappreciated, right? So I think that would actually be the most interesting application for spatial audio, really.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, I've started listening to podcasts. I listen to podcasts all the time, and I use Apple Podcasts. And I've started listening to podcasts through Orbit Monitor to just sort of push it forward a little bit, so it's not just coming from inside my head. And they're so much more enjoyable to listen to. I feel like people aren't necessarily like right up against my face talking to me. I've got that, sense of space that I feel like a podcast should have. So yeah, definitely. I think podcasts are certainly going to be the thing that benefits from, good HRTFs, for example, but a good spatial platform, because, it'd be nice to be there in the room with them, and that gives you that tool to be able to do that.
Exactly. Yeah, that's really interesting. Now we have Orbit, we have Orbit Lite, we have Orbit Pro, we have Orbit Core, we have Esfera, we have an application that shall be unnamed, and then we also have OSLS. So you're also kind of proposing what really amounts to an open format for describing your own speaker layouts.
Yes.
Why did you get into that? Why is that important? And kind of how do you think you can move that into something that the industry actually supports?
So OSLS is quite interesting because it's a relatively new idea to tackle an issue that kept just coming back and hitting me, which is, does Orbit support this speaker layout format? And I'm just like, no, it doesn't support this particular, layout, but I can look into it and I can certainly put it in there. And in the process of looking into how, different formats are stored and the ability to be able to, for example, at Coventry University, they've got a 10.1.4 system with a back speaker. And obviously most programs aren't going to be able to output to that back speaker. It's just going to be there. So I'm like, okay, how do I do this in a way that sort of makes sense? So OSLS is just a really, really simple SDK that contains a speaker order. It's ITU speaker labels. It's got sort of a set of blessed formats, which are common formats that, most programs will use. It has a channel ordering for ADM, IAMF, and then there's two placeholders for MPEG-H and Auro. And then basically the idea behind it is that you can go to osls.io, you can config whatever speaker system that you so wish. If you want to do a weird, 18.2.8, for example, you can do that. Absolutely. There's no problem. Because all you have to do is define the speaker positions, lob it into Orbit, and it'll just play it back. And, no problem at all. So it was designed to solve a problem of flexibility. And, whether anybody does adopt it, who knows? Yeah. It's open, it's there if people want it. If people don't, then Orbit will continue to use it because it just solves the problem that I needed it to solve.
So is there any optimization running in the background? I remember if you think about the Blue Ripple sound plugins that kind of convert, where you can actually they have like this software that allows you to customize a speaker layout for listening to ambisonics, and that is a very complex process actually, because they run through an energy optimization kind of procedure. So is this? Do I understand this correctly? So there is some sophisticated processing in the background that kind of optimizes.
Not with OSLS. No, it's actually done on purpose.
Okay.
So the goal of OSLS is the rendering is not the concern of the layout system. Whatever rendering that you have in your app doesn't matter. All it cares about is defining where the speakers are in space. And at the moment, it's restricted to going to, in terms of polar, it can only go to a distance of 1. So you can't go any further. Cartesian's, limited to 1. But, if you did have a big dome auditorium or an install, then yes, absolutely, you could do a 30 speaker dome, for example, and it should just play it back absolutely fine. It in a way, it's designed to be idiot proof, but also there's so many different renderers out there, and there's no way that, you know, little old me could potentially create a solution that everybody goes, yeah, let's absolutely go off this one system to do things, because obviously all these systems do things slightly differently. But I suppose that's the beauty of particularly object-orientated spatial audio, is that you can absolutely define these wacky speaker systems. You know, your only limitation really is things like channel-based elements or beds, which are, you know, obviously linked directly. You know, beds, the other word for it is direct speaker, because it's linked directly to that speaker. So your imagination really has no limits if you just solely use ambisonics or objects. You know, you can define whatever you like, and yeah, it's designed, like I say, designed to be as dumb as possible, and as flexible as possible. And yeah.
I like that. I like that, as dumb as possible, because, you know, kind of, you know, sometimes there's an advantage in kind of just making things work, right, and kind of making things work in a way that is very efficient, because it allows you to be very, very flexible. Now the platform is currently in beta, I think, and it's OSLS.io, right?
It's OSLS.io. I did miss a trick, actually, and I realized this as soon as I released it, because I created, you know, did all the branding and did all the GitHub, blah, blah, blah. And then I realized I've called it the Orbit Speaker Layout System, but OS could have just been the Orbit Spatial Layout System. And I realized that, hang on a second, why have I called it the Orbit Speaker Layout System when it, you know, and each time I now say it to somebody, I'll keep wanting to say Orbit Spatial, not Orbit Speaker. So it is what it is. But yeah, OSLS.io, and then there's a GitHub link to that as well. And it's sort of in beta. It's sort of not. I mean, it works. There are no issues with it. So it probably won't be in beta for very long. But it's quite a cool little system, because it has meant that the aforementioned 10.1.4 speaker system at Coventry University just works. You know, we now have the ability to listen to the finest Atmos masters, but with that back speaker finally in action. And actually, interestingly, that back speaker, it'd be an amazing Atmos format, because it genuinely does immerse you just that little bit more. You know, if you're sat there, you're thinking, okay, the back speaker's pointing right at the back of your head, but it's lovely. It's really, really, really nice. So, you know, flexibility is key, I think.
You know, kind of, and you, I'm not quite sure. Yeah, well, you are active on our Discord server, right? So we have a couple of people actually who are having these very unusual layouts. I think there are a lot of people on our Discord that are going to be very excited about this possibility to kind of customize everything towards their particular speaker layout.
Yes.
So we have people who are doing like 10 point something,
Yeah.
10.1.2, 6 or something like that. So that is actually,
Yeah,
that's actually
pretty cool.
Really. Yeah.
And it works a little bit differently than Dolby's array system as well, because obviously Dolby's got their little array format as well. And it's a little bit different from that, because you're in an array, it's sort of like a group of speakers, really. But in this, every speaker is defined in space, so an object can absolutely fly through absolutely everything. If you've got ambisonics, it will, you know, fill them as intended. So you can absolutely make use of every speaker that you've got available, even stuff that's, you know, stuffed in a cupboard. Get them out of the cupboard, go plug them in, you know, put them in places, and it should be pretty good.
Now, because of the many things that you do simultaneously, one thing that I actually found particularly interesting is your approach to development also. You know, kind of, you push out things very early and kind of allow people to play around with your beta versions of your software very, very early. But you do that in a way that I think actually makes a lot of sense. You know, these days we have a lot of this, there's sort of this idea of a perpetual beta, right? So you get like a release from a big developer, and then it's really just a kind of beta because the things have not been developed. But in your case, the way you actually approach that, in also in the way with which you interact with your community, makes it much more kind of personal and kind of people think they are really part of the development team, so they don't mind if you're pushing something out. I remember you did like the first version of the video editing, right? Didn't really have any functionality. You could just drop videos in, it was just interesting to see what you're thinking and how things are developing. Now, I want to kind of pivot a little bit towards the way you actually approach development, because you are one of a few companies and you are essentially the company, right? So one person that have managed to really ramp up development speed to a level that I have not seen before. There is maybe one other, which is called Maximus Audio, that does something similar, that are kind of equally as fast. But you are outperforming professional developers substantially, and kind of I'm kind of really curious. What does your development process look like, right? So are there any automation tools in the background that you're using? So how are you able to do things as a single person that companies who have hundreds of developers at their disposal are not able to do?
Yeah. I mean, back to sort of the first point with the community thing, I think that's quite interesting because in a way I'm sort of taking a little bit of the playbook out of the game space, because obviously Steam, the one thing that Steam does really well is your early access games, and I've started to use that term early access a little bit more in terms of the products that I've been doing. And in a space kind of like spatial audio, where there are so many different variations of different files, formats, configurations, speaker systems, again, I can't possibly plan for every scenario. It's impossible for me to be able to do that, and I'd kid myself if I think I could. So the amazing thing about doing this sort of more open approach and more things like perpetual betas, like you say, is the fact that people can give me this feedback very actively and very openly, which I'm absolutely fine about. I think it's absolutely fine in the software space to get things wrong or to try things and to pivot and to pivot fast, obviously. Because that shows people that you're opening to ideas and change and user feedback, and users can absolutely shape what I'm doing. A lot of the features are particularly shaped off of that user feedback. EBU ADMs, for example, was absolutely user feedback. I didn't plan on supporting EBU ADMs in the early days, not within 2026 anyway, but it was very much the drive by the community to be able to be able to do that. So yeah, the community can absolutely shape any of those products. And in terms of the development process, yeah, I mean it's an automation powerhouse. Everything that I can possibly automate will be automated in some way. So there's plenty of GitHub actions, for example, going on. So I have, just for Orbit Core alone, there are 187 automated tests that happen on every single build. So every single build that I push out, before it goes out, obviously it goes through the stages of debug build and a beta build, and then obviously the release build later down the line. And each of those go through these automated tests. And these automated tests are everything from, is the ADM parsing correct? Is the IAMF parsing correct? Does the HRTF work? Is it working fine? Is audio latency okay? Are there any issues with the engine? Absolutely everything, up until UI issues and things like that. So tons of that's automated, and then the building process itself and the app signing and all of that's all automated. And then in terms of me, locating issues, for example, if someone highlights an issue, the best possible tool for finding these issues, instead of me going and searching through every single line of code, is AI tools are fantastic at finding particular bugs, as long as you can explain where, what the bug is and where this might possibly be, what files to check. So that's been essential for me to be able to go, okay, somebody's reported this particular issue, can we have a look at this particular thing? And, give it 20 minutes and it will go, it's possibly this, or this. Would you like to dig down into this? And I'll go, yeah, let's dig down into each of these. Let's try different solutions. Let's try this, for example. And that, takes weeks of time off, I mean, for better or for worse, in terms of the development world, AI has been the ultimate game changer in terms of being able to automate things, and things like GitHub, GitHub Actions and things like that. It's just so powerful. But particularly AI has been the game changer in refactoring, debugging, testing, automation, things like that, where, I would need teams of 10s or 20s of people, and it's like having your own team, which is great. And then the other speed is really down to the fact that I stripped out that orbit core in the early days. So in the early days, 4 months ago. So time is a blur.
It's kind of sometime in the distant past, anything that's older than 2 weeks is
absolutely. So it's a lot of it's automated processes, but I mean a lot of it is also it's long hours, and I am somebody who doesn't easily get bored, and I love to build. I love to build things in general, all sorts of different things. So the cool thing about, and again, the thing that AI kind of gives you is be able to, I want to test 5 different ideas at the same time, and you can let your brain go mad, and it's great. It's a really good tool, but it's not perfect, is the thing. You've got an alert system going off.
Yeah, it's very interesting. This is the most interesting interview I ever did. Also because while we were doing this interview, I'm getting all kinds of weather alerts that I have to be very careful and kind of no, but it's fine.
Oh dear.
It's fine. It's kind of in the United States, kind of these weather alerts are very at least that's my experience.
Yeah.
In Europe, kind of people are a little bit more relaxed. Here, everything is immediately an emergency.
Yeah. It's non-existent here. I mean, the only issue that I've got right now is it's just horribly hot, and air conditioning doesn't translate to British English, unfortunately. So, yeah, that's the only issue that I've got to worry about.
Yeah. So where kind of the development, right? So you are, and one of the things that I think is also important to understand is that with all the AI development, right? So there still needs to be a human in the room. So in the end, right? So there and kind of most of the people that are listening to this to my videos really might not be that familiar with development, but and kind of might hear all the kind of talk about how AI is just doing everything and you just don't need anybody anymore, and it's just kind of sending off an agent. But that's actually not really the case. In the end, it's still you who needs to make all the decisions, right? So yeah. if you have like agents kind of doing the work for you and have these automated processes, in the end, it's still work to kind of check everything, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's never going to start an idea on its own for a start. Yeah. And, it's never going to understand the nuances of, BS 2076-3. It just can't possibly know that unless you teach it that. So I think particularly AI development, and the AI world is super interesting, and I've dived into it in the early days, utilized it for all sorts of different little fun projects, but I think the interesting thing is in the development world, it has now become essentially you've got to use it or you just don't survive at the end of the day, because all of these other businesses will be using it, and they will be using it to accelerate development, and for the most part they are incredibly accurate. You only have to teach it how that coding language works, and then obviously through that process teach it how the fundamentals of whatever the thing that you're trying to do works. So I actually find that explaining things in pseudocode is great if I'm working across multiple languages, because then it can translate that to wherever it needs to go. But I think a lot of people really misunderstand how AI is involved in development. Yeah, it's certainly not a case of I rock up, I load the computer up and go, hey Claude, let's make $1 million. It doesn't work like that. It is the way that I see it, and I was talking about this on LinkedIn with somebody. It is one stage of maybe 10 stages where AI just cannot be involved at all. It's all good making the app and making the app do the thing, but that still doesn't solve testing. It still doesn't solve all the automation. It still doesn't solve the publishing, the licensing, the server costs, the front end web development, the back end of the web, the GDPR, all the business stuff that goes with it. It's a small part, but yet it has accelerated things beyond imagining. But yes, it absolutely, it cannot think for itself. It is not AGI yet at the moment. I think we're a long way off AGI. To be able to, for these things to be able to think for itself. But they are an incredible programming tool. But it is really interesting. In terms of my teaching, for example, so I teach game audio and spatial audio. And in my game audio world, I'm teaching kind of a lot of FMOD and that sort of thing, and games programming as well. And I actually had a little bit of a sort of a crisis about last year. And I was like, I can't understand how to teach this anymore, because AI is now so good at being able to take, for example, problem solving with your code, and to be able to fix that within minutes. It's not necessarily seconds, because it's still got to scan things, it's still got to learn what's going on in your code base, etc., etc. But it's so good at doing it that it's sort of like, how can I teach students to be able to learn to code by hand when there are people to the left of them that might not be doing a university degree or whatever, going past them at 1,000,000 miles an hour? And it's an interesting world. I think the development world is, in a way, has been shaken up by it the most, even though it doesn't necessarily get the most publicity, whereas the music world with Gen AI and things like that, obviously, it's a really interesting world, and the more you dive into it, the more questions I have, I suppose. But it's,
I wanted to kind of bring that up with you, because I think you are a very good example of where are things moving in kind of how to actually use these systems in a way that actually makes sense, and that kind of shows us a little bit the way. And you're absolutely right that in the development space, I think things have already progressed a little bit beyond what we're currently seeing in the music space. And I can say from my experience at the university, we were very concerned that students would no longer be interested in kind of taking computer science, for example. But that ended up not really being the case, because in the end, you still need to know how the code looks, right? So you cannot say, give it to the AI and say, let's do that, and then not really understand what exactly the AI is doing, right? So you still need to have an understanding. And the problem that you brought up is, I think is from an educational perspective, is one of the biggest problems that we have right now. How do we actually teach students the basic skills if they know that they actually have the tools to automate that? And kind of, I found that so interesting that I didn't plan for that would come up in our discussion, but I kind of, it's one of the most interesting things that we currently see in education. And my feeling is that in music, things will kind of progress in a similar way. There will be tools that will automate certain parts of the workflow. And kind of similar to the development workflow, and that will kind of change things, but it will not change the fact that we still need to understand what music is and how to be creative and kind of what to do. It's such a fascinating thing, and I think you're such a good example of how to do that right.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the difficult thing about AI is keeping it under control at times, because it can be incredibly messy. I mean, the one thing that I'm a stickler for is good looking UI, and it is not the best at understanding good looking UI. So a lot of that's, it has to be hand coded. Particularly Swift, it's not the best at understanding, even though Apple's frameworks are really well, documented, it's not the best at it. I think where it's scariest actually for me is web. If you're working in web, not necessarily audio related, but it can just crack out changes like no tomorrow, and this has actually been brilliant for me. If there's a bit of copy on the website that I'm like, I should probably change that, I can load up Claude, I'm walking down the street, and I can go, do you know what, can we change that so it says this instead? And it does the changes, does a pull request to Git, and I go, yeah, it looks right, let me just preview it, click merge, done, it's live, and I'm still walking down the street, so that's the scariest, I think, but also it is incredibly useful. I can't deny, I don't have to ring somebody up and go, can you change this bit of thing on the website? I can't, that can't go out. No, we can't do this. That's a really powerful tool, but it's incredibly powerful at web. But then, as I'm sure people have started to see, you start getting apps that start looking the same. And particularly with platforms like Lovable, for example, is probably one good example. We're starting to see apps and even audio apps where I'm like, this is the same React framework and it's the same, CSS here, and every button's absolutely the same. So I think, if I had to have any advice for anybody, if you're wanting to utilize AI coding in your production for, music plugins or whatever it is, make sure you have absolute control over, things like UI, criticize it, always look over it, triple check it. It's an incredible, powerful tool, but it's not, infallible in any way.
Yeah. That's absolutely true. That's absolutely correct. So I need to reiterate what I said a little bit earlier. Google, Samsung, if anybody of you is watching, you should kind of buy out the South Loop Studios and kind of, because I think what Ben is doing is really amazing and astonishing and kind of moves things into the right direction. Now, the thunderstorm is dying down here,
Good.
so kind of it was very interesting. I never did it kind of in an environment where kind of there was some thunder everywhere. So it was a really immersive experience.
Excellent.
But we are starting to come to a close. So I'm really curious towards the end of this discussion. What do you think the future holds? Where are we headed in the next 3 to 5 years? And I fully acknowledge that, given that essentially your software has existed for a little over half a year now, that kind of projecting out 3 to 5 years is a bit of a challenge. Honestly, I have no clue what's going to happen in 5 years, but nevertheless, let's speculate a little. So what are the things that are in your future? What are the things that South Loop Studios, that Orbit Pro, that any of your projects is going to kind of do in the next couple of years?
I mean, the one thing that will happen, one thing that I'm quite happy to do is publish a sort of like an open roadmap. I know there's a few companies that do that, actually. I think it's quite a nice thing to do, to sort of see where you're heading, so people kind of know, what's later down the line, So in terms of Orbit Pro, it's definitely, like I say, it's no secret looking at it that, audio editing is absolutely coming. So you'll be able to edit ADMs, you'll be able to add new content, you'll be able to essentially have a full end-to-end, editing and authoring solution within there. I would love to potentially get, official Dolby Atmos renderer in there, or some official Dolby support, later down the line. But it for a small developer, it's quite expensive. It's probably the best way to describe it, but it's not something that I'm not wanting to do. I think it absolutely needs to happen, because the way that I see Orbit being, and the suite of tools, is it can absolutely have the Dolby renderer, the open binaural renderer, it can have Apple Spatial Audio, it can have mine, it can have whoever else's comes out, to be able to have the choice, because I think, choice is absolutely everything. And I don't want to, I certainly hate having to jump in between tools to try and get places, so it'd be nice to have this all in one place. And then in terms of the long-term goal, and this kind of links to kind of what's happening in the industry, I absolutely see Google Eclipsa taking a much bigger chunk of the market. And, obviously this means certain companies are going to have to slightly move over and will lose market share, and that is certainly going to happen. But I don't think that's a bad thing, particularly for the music world, because I think in the music world it's quite interesting. I like to call it the atmosification of music, because if you speak to anybody, if you talk about immersive audio, you don't say immersive audio, you say Atmos. And it's become, it's suffered the same thing that Hoover has had, and Google, you Google it, Yeah. And again, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but it does mean that, more people are going to have to come into the music space. So we've got a little bit of choice going on, and choice can only make those tools better. Some competition will only drive Dolby, for example, to go, do you know what, we should update the spec. We should absolutely have scene-based audio in Dolby Atmos. Yeah, absolutely, you should. Get scene-based audio in Dolby Atmos. Bring it up to spec. It would be the best way forward, and competition is the only thing that's going to drive that. So I think the next... It's a format war, at the end of the day, and I think that's going to be the way that it's going. But I think within the next 5 years, we'll also see some formats disappear. Definitely, it's interesting watching the interview with Gert, because, I completely agree with him. There are too many formats. There are just too many. It's in the stereo world. We had a WAV, and you played that WAV back, and that was it. And that was quite nice. And in order for anybody to be able to adopt the immersive world, we have to have easy to understand tools, and we have to be able to have choice is good, but a little bit less choice than we've got right now. If that makes sense, it's a bit, it's a fine line, I suppose. But particularly the music world, I think the broadcast world is doing really well. The broadcast world's got some really cool stuff going on, and the game world has obviously got some really cool stuff going on. The music world is the one to watch, because it's the one that is at the moment, doesn't necessarily have that, choice. It did, I suppose, Tidal with Sony, but that disappeared. So I think that'll be an interesting thing. Other than that, I don't think any of us could possibly know what may or may not happen. I think one thing that I don't think will happen is I don't think full 360 audio will necessarily take off the way that people are predicting it will. I think, interestingly, 7.1.4 as a one size fits all does the job really quite well, actually. I think, we've sort of nailed that. And at the end of the day, that's kind of how Apple Spatial Audio works. It's an internal 7.1.4 bus. And the way that I kind of look at it is, if it's good enough for Apple, it's good enough for me. So I actually think we'll probably stick there for the majority of things. I don't think we'll start to see studios start putting loads of speakers down on the floor and start trying to go full 360. I can't see that happening. It's honestly also a little bit of a challenge, right? So if I think about my living room, so how do I actually kind of fit that in there? If it's sort of that there's a certain limit of what you can do. Now, one thing that I find interesting is that you say that as somebody who is active in game development and kind of game audio, right? And one argument that I always make is that, because some people say immersive audio is going to disappear completely, and I always say, well, that's not really the case, because we have these immersive environments that come out of the game development community, or kind of even virtual reality is going to come back at some point once we've figured out how to miniaturize everything. So kind of immersive audio is just necessary, but that would actually lend itself also to some importance of 360 audio, at least. I found it interesting that you say kind of the channel-based configuration is going to be the dominant one. I think in terms of things like music, I think it will. Right. I don't think 360 will hit the music market, and actually I don't really see the benefit of it massively. I think at the moment, you sit yourself in a Dolby Atmos studio, and it's great, it's lovely, it's immersive, although that's half the problem, because most people are mixing in a Dolby Atmos studio, most people are never going to hear it in a Dolby Atmos studio, so most people still need to check on these things. In terms of the game world, absolutely, there's no doubt about it, but I don't think it'll ever be physical. It will always be through very, very, very good HRTF research, and it will be through some fairly maybe decent head tracking. Like I say, with the AirPods, we've already got some amazing head tracking in that's so quick and immediate. If Apple wanted to work with developers and work with some game developers, and now that macOS is starting to have more games on there, you could absolutely have full head tracked 360 audio, powered by Wise or Fmod. It's already got the tools for it. It's there. It's just a case of hooking those things up, So I couldn't agree more. I think the 360 side of things with games, 100%. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So kind of a lot of things to come. So and a lot of things also to come from South Loop Studios, and a lot of things to watch out for, and kind of a lot of videos that I'm going to make about your stuff in the future. I think it's probably going to become like
I mean, the first video, actually, interestingly, I actually found it by accident. I can't remember when you posted it. It was sort of, is it early March or late Feb, roughly around about then? It might be earlier than that. Yeah. And I was sat with my partner, and I was just like, do you know what? I'm just going to type Orbit Spatial into YouTube and just see what happens, just to see if anybody's found this niche little tool that I've made. And then I came across your channel, and I kid you not, I could not watch it back. for the first time. I listened to it, but I couldn't watch it. I actually just walked around the room. And I was like, oh my God, what's he going to say? What's he going to say? And obviously, you know, you enjoyed it, and that's what mattered. And I was like, hang on a second, this might work. So, you know, that review has stayed with me, which is quite nice. But it's also the review that has helped me push forward a little bit. You know, for example, you highlighted the loudness stuff, and I was just like, you know, I was like, I need to get that fixed. You know, that absolutely needs to happen. So yeah, it was an interesting discovery.
Yeah, no, it's and kind of, you know, I do that on the side, obviously, right? So kind of my main job is something else. So I'm not really a professional YouTuber or somebody who lives from that. You know, quite frankly, YouTube pays me like $100 a month. That's sort of how much I get. But that also gives me the freedom to just do things the way I want, and you know, and I really when I found Orbit, actually I don't think I found it. I think somebody in our community, in our Discord, kind of found it and posted that. So by the way, everybody who's watching, you join our Discord server, because if there's anything coming out in spatial audio, you're going to see that there first. And it was just so exciting to kind of have somebody really kind of approach things in a somewhat new and innovative way, and kind of really break out of the traditional kind of way of thinking, the atmosification, right? So kind of I like that word. I'm going to use that now. And yeah, but it is a small channel, so kind of, and honestly, my accent, kind of, a lot of people are kind of a little bit thrown off by that, but you know, it is what it is. At least kind of people know that I'm not AI, I'm actually a real person.
Absolutely.
Now, one thing that in my review about Orbit Pro, what I say, kind of, I really liked the video editing capabilities. But one thing that I said that I'm starting to get a bit concerned about is if you actually kind of move into that direction, you obviously can't make a video editing tool, right? I mean, that's just outside the capabilities of a small developer. So I'm kind of just curious, are you planning on kind of turning that into a full-blown video editing kind of
I don't think
suit?
it will necessarily go down the routes of, you know, trading punches with DaVinci Resolve, but... you know, the idea is sort of bringing it back to that spatial podcast idea.
Yeah.
And one goal that I can tell people about is that 360 video support is absolutely on the horizon for it, because it has to be. There's no way of avoiding that. So it will always have, to a degree, some video capability in terms of editing. And in a way, I took a bit of inspiration from Reaper, which has very much turned into my favorite DAW. And obviously, you can do a little bit of basic video editing in Reaper, which is quite cool. And you know, I sort of stole a little bit of a idea out of their playbook, and I thought, you know what, actually, be nice to be able to just do a little bit of basic, cutting, editing, fading, bit of text. Maybe you could generate time code, put it down at the bottom, which is another thing that's coming to Orbit, so you can just generate your time code and slap it to the bottom of your video. But it's slowly turned into something a little bit more, fully fleshed out in terms of a video editor. But it's very much targeted at not necessarily, your feature films and stuff like that. Those people are going to be thoroughly in Avid's tools and DaVinci Resolve or Final Cut or whatever you're going to be in. So they're just going to slap a video in, one track, done, playback with the ADM, whatever you might do. But for music videos and for podcasts, that's the target area of that video editing tool. So it does obviously single playback really well, but it can do some basic stuff if you just want to stay in one tool. And it's that thing I said again, I'd like to be able to do everything in one tool to an okay-ish, level, to be able to get something out there. So that's the idea behind it, but it has escalated into a little bit more of a non-linear video editor, and it's starting to get, it's like I say, it's quite snappy. It's got really quick scrub. It essentially works on the same engine as Final Cut.
Right. So it is actually it does work quite well. One thing that I noticed when I was playing around with it in terms of the application scenario, I played around with Resolume for a while, right?
Okay.
Sort of a tool for VJing really. I thought of it more like a VJing tool where you can and maybe at some point projection mapping would be an option, right? But sort of this idea of kind of using it as a tool that is also aimed at live performance things. It's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah. In fact, actually, the video engine for Orbit has taken the same route as Orbit Core. So it's actually Orbit Video Core. It's a whole separate thing that I've pulled out of it, in order to make it as flexible as possible. Which again, lends down to that fast iteration speed and stuff like that. But yeah, that's where it's going anyway.
Very, very cool. Very, very cool. Well, thanks again for kind of coming on and for this very interesting discussion. And thanks to the weather gods for making sure that we were able to actually complete it. I'm not quite sure how much thunder I can actually take out of that video. We will see. but kind of it was a thunderous kind of conversation.
Yes, indeed.
So I thought,
absolutely.
So thanks again for kind of coming on, and I can only recommend everybody to check out South Loop Studios and all the stuff that they're doing, particularly Orbit Pro, but also Orbit Lite and OSLS and Esfera. They're all kind of cool
and Cota
things.
as well. Actually, there's the loudness meter as well.
Loudness meter. Okay, we didn't cover that. Oh,
yeah.
So kind of and whenever you kind of look at these things, remember there was just one person behind it. So thanks again, Ben, for coming on.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Well, that's everything for today. If you have any questions or comments, drop them in the comment section below or join our free Discord server. The invite link is in the description. And don't forget to subscribe to stay updated on all things Dolby Atmos and immersive audio. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.